Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to a voice that isn't your own, but somehow feels more familiar than your own heartbeat. Every person on Earth, from the bustling streets of Tokyo to remote villages in the Amazon, suddenly hears the same gentle presence speaking directly into their consciousness. This isn't madness. This isn't imagination. This is God. And for the first time in human history, the conversation goes both ways. What would happen if the divine silence that has defined faith for thousands of years suddenly ended forever? Welcome to our channel, where we explore forbidden questions and hidden truths of history, religion, and the unknown. If you love journeys that challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to join us, because today's story may change the way you see everything. Our story begins in ancient times, when humanity last heard the voice of the Almighty as clearly as thunder. Chapter 1. The Sacred Silence. For over 4,000 years, the Tower of Babel has stood as a monument to humanity's greatest separation from the divine. According to ancient texts, this was the last time all of humanity shared a common language, and more importantly, the last time they could speak directly with their Creator. The biblical account tells us that God scattered the languages and confused human communication as punishment for their pride. But what it doesn't tell us is how this created the sacred silence that would define every religion for millennia to come. From that moment forward, only a chosen few, prophets like Moses, Abraham, and Samuel, would hear the divine voice directly. The rest of humanity would have to rely on prayer, scripture, and religious leaders to bridge the impossible gap between earth and heaven. Churches, temples, and mosques became the houses where people gathered to whisper their hopes into empty air, never knowing if their words reached divine ears. Priests and pastors became translators of ancient texts, interpreting God's will through books written by human hands. This sacred silence created something beautiful and terrible at the same time. Beautiful because it required faith, the ability to believe without seeing, to trust without hearing. Terrible because billions of souls lived their entire lives wondering if God was really listening, if their prayers mattered, if they were truly loved by the divine. Tonight, in our alternate reality, that silence is about to end forever. But nobody knows it yet. Chapter 2. The moment everything changed. The morning of September 21st begins like any other across the globe. In New York, coffee shops fill with rushing commuters. In Mumbai, street vendors prepare for another day of bustling trade. In small farming communities worldwide, people wake to tend their animals and crops, just as their ancestors did centuries before. Then, at exactly 6:33 a.m., in every time zone around the world, it happens. A voice, gentle as a whisper, yet clear as crystal, speaks into the consciousness of every human being on Earth. Newborn babies in hospital nurseries stop crying and listen with wide, knowing eyes. Elderly people in nursing homes sit up in their beds with tears streaming down their faces. The voice speaks simultaneously in Mandarin to a businessman in Beijing, in Spanish to a grandmother in Mexico City, and in English to a teenager in London. The words are simple, but they change everything. My beloved children, I have always been here. Now you can hear me. Chaos erupts across the planet. Phone networks crash as 7 billion people try to call someone, anyone, to ask if they heard it too. Social media explodes with posts in hundreds of languages, all describing the same impossible experience. News anchors struggle to maintain composure as they report on a phenomenon that defies explanation. But the most remarkable thing isn't the global panic or confusion. It's the children. From toddlers to teenagers, young people around the world begin responding to the voice naturally, as if they've been waiting their whole lives for this conversation to begin. They're not afraid. They're not shocked. They simply start talking back, and somehow, impossibly, they receive answers. The age of sacred silence has ended. The age of divine conversation has begun. Chapter 3: The Great Revelation. Within hours of the first contact, the conversations deepen. God's voice continues speaking to individuals across the globe, and the messages being shared are unlike anything found in traditional religious texts. The divine presence confirms something that sends shockwaves through every major faith. All religions contain pieces of the truth, but none possess the complete picture. To Christians, God explains that the Bible is a beautiful collection of human attempts to understand divine love, but it was never meant to be the final word. To Muslims, the voice reveals that the Quran captured important truths about submission to the divine, but spiritual growth requires more than submission alone. To Buddhists, God confirms that enlightenment is real, but it's just the beginning of consciousness, not the end. Jewish communities around the world hear God explain that they were indeed chosen, not for privilege, but for the responsibility of keeping faith alive during humanity's spiritual childhood. Hindu devotees discover that their understanding of multiple aspects of divinity was closest to the truth, but even they miss the complete nature of divine unity. The most stunning revelation comes when God addresses atheists and agnostics directly. Instead of condemnation, the divine voice expresses appreciation for their intellectual honesty and their refusal to accept easy answers. Your questions, God tells them, have been more precious to me than 1,000 blind prayers. Religious leaders around the world face an unprecedented crisis. Seminary students walk out of classes mid-lecture. Pastors stand in empty pulpits, realizing their congregations are at home, having direct conversations with the source of all wisdom. The Vatican calls emergency meetings, while Islamic scholars debate whether this violates or fulfills the teachings of Muhammad. But perhaps the most shocking revelation is yet to come. God explains that this direct communication was always planned. Humanity simply wasn't ready before now. The species has finally reached a level of spiritual and emotional maturity where direct divine guidance won't overwhelm or corrupt their growth. Chapter 4: Prophets No More. Pastor Michael Thompson stands in his empty church sanctuary, staring at rows of vacant pews that just last Sunday were filled with his faithful congregation. For 30 years, he has preached about hearing God's voice through prayer and scripture study. Now his phone buzzes constantly with messages from parishioners describing their own direct conversations with the Almighty. Around the world, similar scenes play out in mosques, temples, and synagogues. Religious leaders who built their identities around being spiritual intermediaries suddenly find themselves obsolete. Some embrace the change with joy and relief, finally free from the burden of speaking for God. Others resist desperately, claiming the voices people hear are demonic deceptions or mass hallucinations. Rabbi Sarah Cohen chooses adaptation over resistance. She transforms her synagogue from a house of interpretation into a house of conversation, helping her community learn to distinguish God's voice from their own thoughts and emotions. Her evening gatherings become workshops where people share their divine conversations and learn from each other's experiences. But not all religious leaders respond with such grace. Televangelist Marcus Sterling declares the phenomenon a satanic conspiracy, urging his followers to resist the voices and trust only his interpretation of Scripture. His message falls on increasingly deaf ears as his own followers discover that God's actual voice is nothing like Sterling's harsh, judgmental pronouncements. The most dramatic transformation occurs in the Vatican, where Pope Francis makes an unprecedented announcement. The Catholic Church will no longer claim to be humanity's only path to salvation. Instead, it will serve as a support system for believers learning to navigate their direct relationship with the divine. The announcement sends shockwaves through traditional Catholic communities, but brings hope to millions who have felt excluded by church doctrine. In remote mountain monasteries, Buddhist monks discover that their years of meditation have prepared them perfectly for this new reality. They become teachers, not of religious doctrine, but of the practical skills needed to maintain clear divine communication without ego or distortion interfering. The age of prophets and intermediaries is ending. The age of universal priesthood has begun. Chapter 5. The divine conversation begins. God's personality surprises everyone. The voice that speaks to humanity is not the stern, distant judge portrayed in much religious art and literature. Instead, people discover a presence that is patient, playful, and deeply interested in the smallest details of human life. A child in Brazil asks God about her pet hamster and receives a delightful explanation of how all living creatures contribute to the cosmic dance of existence. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a quantum physicist in Barcelona, finds herself in extended conversations about the nature of reality itself. God explains complex scientific principles with simple analogies, revealing that the laws of physics are expressions of divine creativity rather than limitations on divine power. The conversations help her understand that science and spirituality have always been studying the same infinite reality from different angles. In Detroit, unemployed factory worker James Washington discovers that God is deeply concerned about his struggle to find work and provide for his family. The divine guidance he receives isn't magical solutions, but practical wisdom about developing new skills and finding opportunities in his community. God's advice sounds more like a wise, loving parent than a distant deity. Perhaps most surprising is God's sense of humor. Artists worldwide report divine laughter during their creative processes. Comedians find themselves collaborating with the source of all joy. Musicians discover that their most beautiful compositions come when they harmonize their creativity with divine inspiration, rather than trying to create something purely from human effort. The conversations reveal that God experiences emotions, not human-like mood swings, but deep responses to the joy and suffering of creation. When humans hurt each other, God feels genuine pain. When they show love and compassion, divine joy radiates through the entire cosmos. This emotional connection transforms prayer from requests for favors into genuine relationship building. People learn that they can discuss anything with God: their fears about the future, their frustrations with relationships, even their doubts about faith itself. The divine presence never judges, never condemns, never dismisses human concerns as trivial. Every conversation deepens understanding and strengthens the connection between human and divine consciousness. Chapter 6. Science meets the sacred. The world's scientific community faces its greatest revolution since Galileo first pointed a telescope at the stars. In laboratories from MIT to CERN, researchers discover they can simply ask God about the mysteries that have puzzled humanity for centuries. The answers they receive don't diminish science. They elevate it to new heights of understanding. Dr. Kenji Nakamura at Tokyo University learns that quantum entanglement works because consciousness itself exists outside the normal boundaries of space and time. God explains that what physicists call spooky action at distance is actually evidence that all matter and energy remain connected to their divine source. This revelation leads to breakthrough technologies that seem like magic, but follow natural laws humanity simply hadn't discovered yet. Medical researchers receive divine guidance that revolutionizes healing. God explains that the human body was designed with incredible self-repair capabilities that modern medicine barely understands. Doctors learn to work with these divine blueprints rather than against them, leading to cures for diseases that have plagued humanity for millennia. Cancer patients receive personalized healing protocols that address not just physical symptoms, but spiritual and emotional causes of illness. Evolutionary biologists discover that their theories were both right and incomplete. God confirms that evolution is real. It's actually the process by which divine creativity unfolds across time. Each new species, each adaptation, each step in the development of life represents divine experimentation and joy in creation. The so-called missing links in fossil records turn out to be intentional gaps where divine intervention accelerated evolutionary processes. Astronomers learn that the universe is far more alive and conscious than they imagined. Every star, every planet, every galaxy participates in a cosmic symphony of awareness that humans are just beginning to hear. The search for extraterrestrial life becomes unnecessary. God reveals that consciousness exists everywhere, just informs that human instruments haven't yet learned to detect. Climate scientists receive urgent divine guidance about healing the Earth's environmental damage. The solutions they discover combine advanced technology with ancient wisdom about living in harmony with natural systems. God reveals that the planet itself is a living, conscious entity that has been patiently waiting for humanity to mature enough to become true partners in planetary stewardship. Chapter 7: The Moral Revolution. Moral clarity arrives like sunrise after a long, dark night of ethical confusion. For centuries, humans have debated what is right and wrong, often using religious texts written thousands of years ago to judge modern situations. Now, with direct access to divine wisdom, humanity discovers that morality is both simpler and more complex than they imagined. God's guidance on social justice shocks both conservatives and liberals. The divine voice strongly condemns poverty and inequality, calling them human-created problems that violate the fundamental principle of universal love. But the solutions God proposes don't fit neatly into either political category. Instead of government programs or free market approaches alone, divine wisdom suggests community-based solutions that combine practical help with spiritual transformation. The revelation about sexuality surprises everyone. God explains that physical intimacy is a sacred gift meant to strengthen the bond between souls who choose to share their life journey together. Gender identity and sexual orientation are revealed as natural variations in the divine design, not moral failures or sins to be corrected. What matters is love, commitment, and mutual respect, not the specific configuration of bodies or gender identities involved. Traditional moral codes based on external rules give way to internal guidance based on love and wisdom. People discover they no longer need long lists of do's and don'ts when they can simply ask God about specific situations. The divine guidance they receive always points toward choices that increase love, reduce suffering, and promote the spiritual growth of everyone involved. Criminal justice systems worldwide begin transforming as God reveals the true nature of crime and punishment. Most criminal behavior stems from spiritual wounds, untreated trauma, and disconnection from divine love. Prisons become healing centers where offenders work through their pain with divine guidance rather than simply serving time as punishment. Victim-offender reconciliation programs flourish as people discover that forgiveness, properly understood, liberates both parties from cycles of hurt and revenge. Business ethics transform as entrepreneurs learn to ask God about their decisions. Companies that operate with divine guidance discover they can be profitable while serving the genuine needs of their communities. Exploitative practices become impossible when business leaders develop direct relationships with the source of all abundance and realize that harming others ultimately harms themselves. Chapter 8: Economics of Eden. Wall Street traders stare at their screens in bewilderment as global markets react to humanity's newfound ability to consult divine wisdom about economic decisions. Stock prices for companies that exploit workers or damage the environment plummet as investors receive guidance to divest from harmful industries. Meanwhile, businesses focused on genuine service to humanity see unprecedented growth. God's economic wisdom challenges both capitalist and socialist assumptions. The divine voice reveals that abundance is humanity's natural state. Scarcity only exists because of fear-based thinking and artificial competition. The earth produces more than enough resources for everyone to live comfortably, but human systems of distribution have created inequality through greed and hoarding. Martha Richardson, a community organizer in Portland, receives divine guidance to start a local currency system based on service rather than profit. Community members earn blessing tokens by helping their neighbors, sharing resources, and contributing to collective well-being. The system spreads rapidly as people discover that economies based on mutual care are both more stable and more satisfying than traditional money-based markets. Agricultural communities worldwide learn divine permaculture techniques that restore soil health while increasing crop yields. God teaches farmers to work with natural ecosystems rather than fighting against them. Chemical fertilizers and pesticides become obsolete as farmers discover how to partner with beneficial insects, soil microorganisms, and weather patterns to create abundant harvests that heal the land. Corporate executives find themselves in unexpected conversations about the true purpose of business. God explains that economic activity should serve human flourishing and environmental health, not just profit maximization. Companies that align their missions with divine principles discover they can be wildly successful while making positive contributions to society. Those that resist change find their customer bases evaporating as consumers develop clearer guidance about supporting ethical businesses. Banking and finance transform as people learn divine principles of resource sharing and abundance creation. Interest rates on loans that help people build better lives drop to near zero, while speculation that exploits economic instability becomes unprofitable. Investment flows toward projects that benefit communities rather than just enriching wealthy individuals. The concept of unemployment becomes obsolete as communities organize work around everyone's unique talents and divine purpose, rather than artificial job scarcity created by profit-maximizing automation. Chapter 9: Politics and the Divine Democracy. President Maria Santos sits in the Oval Office, no longer the most powerful person in the country. Every citizen can now consult the ultimate authority on justice, governance, and human welfare. How do you lead a nation when everyone has access to divine wisdom about political decisions? Across the globe, political systems strain under the weight of universal divine communication. Dictators discover they can no longer control information when every citizen can verify government claims directly with God. Propaganda becomes useless when people can ask the source of all truth about political promises and policies. In China, the Communist Party faces unprecedented challenges as citizens receive divine guidance about human rights, freedom of expression, and government transparency. Peaceful protests emerge nationwide, but these demonstrations feel different from traditional political movements. Protesters carry signs with messages they received during divine conversations, and their demands focus on spiritual principles rather than just political reforms. Democratic nations face their own upheavals as voters begin making decisions based on divine guidance rather than party loyalty or media influence. Traditional political campaigns become obsolete when candidates can't fool voters who have direct access to truth. Politicians who genuinely serve their communities thrive, while those motivated by power or personal gain find themselves abandoned by constituencies who can discern their true motives. Senator Rachel Thompson transforms her approach to governance completely. Instead of making decisions based on polling data or party positions, she consults God about every vote and policy proposal. Her constituents do the same, creating a new form of democracy where political representatives serve as facilitators of divine wisdom rather than independent decision makers. Local governments adapt faster than national ones. City councils become community discernment sessions where residents share the guidance they've received about local issues. Budget decisions prioritize projects that serve the common good rather than special interests. Urban planning incorporates divine wisdom about creating spaces that support human flourishing and environmental health. International relations transform as world leaders discover they can consult God about conflicts, trade agreements, and diplomatic challenges. Wars become impossible when soldiers receive divine commands to lay down their weapons and embrace their enemies as brothers and sisters. Chapter 10: The War to End All Wars. The last great battle of human history begins not with gunfire, but with silence. In military bases worldwide, soldiers pause mid-training as they hear God's voice speaking directly into their hearts. Put down your weapons. Your true enemy has never been each other. General Robert Hayes stands before his battalion, watching as weapons fall from hands that had been trained to kill. His men look at him with tears streaming down their faces, no longer able to reconcile their divine conversations with their military orders. The voice they hear speaks of love, unity, and peace, concepts that make warfare not just immoral, but literally impossible. But not everyone accepts the divine intervention. Underground movements form among those who reject direct communication with God, claiming it violates human free will and independence. They see the universal peace emerging across the globe as a form of divine dictatorship that robs humanity of its right to choose conflict, competition, and violence. The resistance is led by former military leaders, displaced politicians, and business executives who profited from systems based on scarcity and conflict. They developed technology designed to block divine communication, creating silence zones where people can avoid hearing God's voice. These areas become gathering points for those who prefer human authority over divine guidance. The confrontation reaches its climax in the Nevada desert, where resistance forces have built a massive military compound designed to shield its occupants from divine influence. They plan to launch a nuclear weapon at a major population center, hoping to prove that human will can override divine intervention. But as the countdown begins, even the most hardened resistance fighters begin to hear the voice they've tried so hard to silence. The nuclear launch fails not because of mechanical problems, but because every person involved in the process receives simultaneous divine guidance to step away from the controls. The weapon deactivates itself as soldiers, scientists, and technicians choose love over destruction. The resistance crumbles as its members realize that fighting against universal love is like fighting against their own heartbeat. Military equipment worldwide is transformed into tools for construction, agriculture, and environmental restoration. Former soldiers become community builders, using their organizational skills to coordinate massive projects for human betterment rather than human destruction. Chapter 11. Hidden Texts Revealed. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a biblical scholar at Oxford, sits surrounded by ancient manuscripts that materialized in libraries worldwide overnight. God has revealed the locations of hidden texts that were deliberately removed from official scriptures by early church councils who feared their revolutionary messages about divine love and human equality. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene emerges complete, revealing her role as Jesus' closest spiritual companion and teaching partner. The text shows that early Christianity included powerful female leaders whose contributions were systematically erased by patriarchal church structures. God explains that Mary wasn't just a follower, she was a co-teacher whose insights about divine love were considered too threatening to male religious authority. Ancient scrolls appear in the Vatican archives, containing Jesus' teachings about reincarnation and the soul's journey across multiple lifetimes. These passages were removed because they contradicted the Church's desire to control salvation through exclusive religious membership. God reveals that consciousness continues growing through many experiences, making eternal punishment impossible and universal salvation inevitable. The complete Book of Enoch surfaces in Ethiopian monasteries, describing in detail humanity's relationship with other dimensional beings and advanced civilizations throughout the cosmos. Early church leaders removed these sections because they suggested that Earth wasn't the center of God's attention, a concept that threatened religious institutions' claims of exclusive divine favor. Islamic scholars discover missing chapters of the Quran that emphasize the feminine aspects of divine nature, referring to Allah using both masculine and feminine pronouns. These passages were excluded during the compilation process because they challenged male religious authority in 7th century Arabian society. Hindu temples worldwide report the appearance of ancient Sanskrit texts describing advanced technologies that were common in previous civilizations. These writings reveal that humanity has risen and fallen many times, with each cycle reaching higher levels of spiritual and technological development before choosing either wisdom or destruction. The most shocking revelation comes when God explains that every major religion contains hidden teachings about direct divine communication. The practices were suppressed because religious institutions realized that people who could speak directly with God wouldn't need human intermediaries, threatening the power structures that had developed around spiritual authority. Chapter 12. The Afterlife Unveiled. Death, humanity discovers, is nothing like what any religion taught. Through direct conversation, God reveals that consciousness never actually ends. It simply transitions to different forms of experience and learning. The afterlife isn't a destination, but a continuation of the soul's eternal journey toward greater love and understanding. Jennifer Walsh, whose husband died in a car accident 3 years ago, receives the most profound gift imaginable: direct communication with his continuing consciousness. He explains that death feels like waking from a beautiful but confusing dream. Physical life, he tells her, is just one classroom in an infinite university of spiritual growth. He's still learning, still growing, still very much himself, just without the limitations of a physical body. God's explanation of hell shocks every religious tradition. There is no eternal punishment, no lake of fire, no divine vengeance. What humans call hell is actually a healing process where souls work through the pain they cause themselves and others during physical life. It's not punishment, but rehabilitation, not eternal, but temporary, not separation from God, but intensive divine therapy. Reincarnation, God reveals, is real, but not mandatory. Some souls choose to return to physical life for additional learning experiences, while others continue their development in non-physical dimensions. The choice depends on what each consciousness needs for its continued growth. Past life memories usually remain buried during physical incarnation to prevent overwhelming the current personality with too much information. Near-death experiences worldwide feel validated as God confirms their visions were accurate glimpses of the transition process. The tunnels of light, the life reviews, the encounters with deceased relatives, all represent real aspects of consciousness leaving physical form. But these experiences are just the beginning of post-physical existence, not its entirety. The most comforting revelation is that no one experiences the afterlife alone. Every soul is surrounded by loving guides, teachers, and companions who help them process their earthly experiences and prepare for whatever comes next. The isolation and fear that humans associate with death simply don't exist in the spiritual dimensions where consciousness continues its eternal adventure. Chapter 13. Other Worlds, Other Children. The night sky takes on new meaning as God reveals that Earth is just one of countless worlds hosting conscious life throughout the universe. Each planet with intelligent beings experiences its own spiritual evolution, complete with prophets, scriptures, and religious development suited to their unique forms of consciousness. Dr. Chen Wei, director of the Beijing Observatory, leads humanity's first authorized contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. Through divine facilitation, she participates in conversations with beings from 3 different star systems. Their planets went through similar phases of spiritual awakening, though their physical forms and cultural expressions differ dramatically from human experience. The beings from Kepler 442b evolved from aquatic ancestors and experienced divine communication through harmonic vibrations rather than vocal thoughts. Their entire civilization operates as a musical symphony, where each individual consciousness contributes unique notes to planetary harmony. They achieved universal peace 3,000 years ago and now focus on cosmic exploration and artistic creation. A silicon-based species from the Vega system communicates through crystalline structures that store and share memories across generations. Their prophets are living libraries who preserve divine revelations in crystal matrices that can be accessed by touching special formations. They've never experienced war because their collective memory system makes it impossible to forget the consequences of violence. Most fascinating are the energy beings from a planet orbiting Proxima Centauri. They transcended physical form millennia ago, but maintain connection to their home world through pure consciousness. They serve as galactic mentors, helping younger civilizations navigate the transition from physical to spiritual existence without losing their essential nature. God explains that each species receives divine guidance appropriate to their developmental stage and biological nature. What humans call angels are often advanced beings from other worlds who volunteer to assist younger civilizations during crucial transition periods. The Star of Bethlehem, God reveals, was actually a spacecraft from the Vega system, carrying observers who documented Jesus' mission for the galactic community. Earth's role in this cosmic civilization is unique because humans possess an unusual combination of creative ability, emotional depth, and spiritual potential. Other species watch humanity's current transition with great interest because the outcome will influence how divine communication develops throughout the galaxy. Chapter 14: The Atheist's Dilemma. Professor Richard Blackwood, author of 12 books debunking religious claims, sits in his Oxford office having the most intellectually challenging conversation of his career. The voice he denied for decades now speaks directly into his consciousness, with patience and humor, acknowledging every argument he ever made against divine existence, while gently revealing the flaws in his reasoning. God's response to atheistic criticism surprises everyone. Instead of anger or judgment, the divine voice expresses genuine appreciation for intellectual honesty and rigorous questioning. Your skepticism, God tells prominent atheist leaders, has been more valuable than mindless belief. You refuse to accept easy answers, and that searching spirit is exactly what I hope to develop in human consciousness. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuroscientist who spent her career explaining religious experience as brain chemistry, discovers that consciousness and neural activity are connected but not identical. God explains that physical brains are like radio receivers. They don't create consciousness, they channel it. This revelation doesn't diminish her scientific work. It expands it into new realms of understanding about the relationship between matter and mind. The most dramatic conversion belongs to Marcus Sterling, the famous evangelist who initially declared divine communication to be satanic deception. When he finally allows himself to hear God's actual voice, he breaks down completely. The divine presence he encounters is nothing like the harsh, judgmental deity he preached about for 30 years. God's love and compassion are so overwhelming that Sterling spends 3 days weeping as he processes the damage his false teachings caused to countless souls seeking authentic spiritual connection. Atheist communities worldwide grapple with undeniable evidence of divine reality, but God's approach to their skepticism offers a surprising solution. The divine voice explains that doubt and questioning strengthen rather than weaken genuine spirituality. Faith that can't survive intellectual scrutiny isn't really faith. It's just wishful thinking dressed up in religious language. Many former atheists become the most effective teachers of balanced spirituality because they bring critical thinking skills to divine communication. They help others distinguish between authentic divine guidance and human projections, wishful thinking, or ego-driven fantasies masquerading as spiritual revelation. Chapter 15. Ancient Mysteries Solved. The Great Pyramid of Giza reveals its secrets as God explains the truth behind humanity's most enduring mysteries. The massive stone structure wasn't built by alien visitors or slave labor. It was constructed by spiritually advanced humans who could communicate directly with divine intelligence, just as modern humanity is learning to do. Ancient Egyptian civilization, God reveals, achieved direct divine communication during the reign of Akhenaten, who tried to share this gift with his entire kingdom. The priests resisted because universal divine access threatened their power, leading to the systematic destruction of records about humanity's first experiment with widespread spiritual awakening. The pyramids were built as monuments to this achievement and as resonance chambers designed to amplify divine communication for future generations. Atlantis, the legendary lost continent, was real, but not where most people think. It existed in the Pacific Ocean near modern-day Hawaii and achieved technological advancement through the marriage of spiritual wisdom and scientific knowledge. The civilization fell when its leaders chose technological power over spiritual growth, using their abilities for conquest rather than service. The continent sank not through geological disaster, but through divine intervention to prevent the spread of spiritually corrupted technology. Stonehenge and similar megalithic sites worldwide were constructed as cosmic communication devices by ancient peoples who understood that consciousness could transcend physical limitations. These stone circles served as amplifiers for telepathic communication across vast distances and as teaching centers where initiates learned to hear divine guidance directly. The precise astronomical alignments weren't for calendar keeping, they were for tuning human consciousness to cosmic frequencies. Biblical figures like Moses, Elijah, and Jesus possessed the same ability to communicate directly with God that all humans now share. Their miracles were natural expressions of consciousness working in harmony with divine will. Walking on water, healing the sick, and multiplying food were demonstrations of what becomes possible when human awareness aligns perfectly with divine creative power. The lost years of Jesus, missing from biblical accounts, were spent in India and Tibet, learning advanced consciousness techniques from masters who maintained ancient traditions of direct divine communication. His teachings weren't unique revelations. They were part of a universal spiritual science that has existed since humanity's beginning, but was preserved only in hidden mystery schools. Chapter 16. Digital Divinity. Silicon Valley faces its strangest challenge yet. How do you develop technology to support humanity's direct communication with God? Tech entrepreneurs discover that their usual approach of disrupting existing systems doesn't work when the system they're trying to improve is divine consciousness itself. Emma Rodriguez, lead developer at a major smartphone manufacturer, works on the Divine Connect app, software designed to help people distinguish authentic divine communication from their own mental chatter. The app uses advanced AI to analyze speech patterns, emotional resonance, and spiritual consistency in users' reported divine conversations. But testing reveals a surprising limitation. Artificial intelligence can detect false spiritual experiences, but it cannot generate or enhance authentic ones. Social media platforms struggle with an explosion of posts claiming to share God's direct messages. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram develop new verification systems to help users identify genuine spiritual insights versus human interpretations or outright fabrications. The most reliable indicator proves to be consistency. Authentic divine communication always promotes love, unity, and growth, while false messages typically support division, fear, or ego inflation. Cryptocurrency markets experience wild fluctuations as people receive divine guidance about economic systems and resource distribution. A new digital currency called Lovecoin emerges, designed to reward acts of service and community building rather than speculation or hoarding. Its value remains stable because it's backed by human compassion rather than artificial scarcity. Virtual reality developers create sacred space environments where people can practice divine communication without physical distractions. These digital temples, meditation gardens, and prayer chambers help beginners learn to quiet their minds and distinguish divine whispers from mental noise. Advanced users report that the virtual environments sometimes become more real than physical reality during deep spiritual connection. The most significant breakthrough comes from quantum computing research. Scientists discover that consciousness and quantum mechanics operate on similar principles. Both involve non-local connections that transcend ordinary space and time limitations. This revelation leads to communication technologies that amplify human consciousness rather than replacing it, creating tools that enhance rather than interfere with divine connection. However, the biggest challenge proves to be digital addiction. Many people become so focused on documenting and sharing their divine conversations online that they lose the intimacy and personal growth that comes from private spiritual relationship. God's guidance about technology use becomes one of the most frequently requested topics for divine consultation. Chapter 17: The Children's Revolution. 8-year-old Maya Patel stands before the United Nations General Assembly, translating divine guidance about global cooperation with a clarity that leaves world leaders speechless. Children worldwide have become humanity's most natural divine communicators, unburdened by adult skepticism, religious conditioning, and psychological barriers that complicate spiritual connection. Schools transform as teachers discover that their students can consult divine wisdom directly about learning challenges, social conflicts, and creative projects. Traditional educational models based on information transfer become obsolete when children can ask God about mathematics, history, and science. Instead, classrooms become workshops where young people learn to integrate divine guidance with critical thinking and practical application. 12-year-old Samuel Johnson revolutionizes mathematics education when he receives divine insights about number theory that help his classmates understand complex concepts through simple, playful examples. His teacher, Mrs. Patterson, realizes that her role has shifted from information provider to learning facilitator, helping students develop discernment between divine wisdom and their own mental projections. The generational divide becomes particularly acute in religious families, where parents struggle to accept that their children have direct access to spiritual truths the adults spent decades studying through traditional scripture and doctrine. Many young people report that God's actual voice sounds nothing like the stern, judgmental deity described in their family's religious teachings. Teenagers lead community healing initiatives, using divine guidance to address bullying, addiction, and social inequality with wisdom that surpasses their chronological age. High schools establish divine consultation programs where students can access spiritual guidance for major life decisions about careers, relationships, and personal development. The most remarkable transformation occurs in special needs communities. Children with autism, Down syndrome, and other neurological differences prove to be exceptionally gifted divine communicators. Their neurological variations, previously seen as limitations, turn out to be advantages for accessing non-verbal spiritual information. These children become teachers and translators, helping neurotypical individuals develop more sensitive spiritual awareness. Child psychologists discover that young people naturally distinguish between authentic divine communication and imagination, hallucination, or wish fulfillment. Children consistently report that God's voice feels different from their own thoughts, more loving, more patient, more wise, and always encouraging growth rather than enabling harmful behavior. Chapter 18: Love in the Age of Divine Guidance. Romance takes on new dimensions when couples can consult divine wisdom about their relationships. Dating apps become obsolete as people learn to ask God about compatibility, timing, and authentic connection. The divorce rate plummets as couples receive guidance about working through conflicts with love and understanding rather than ego and defensiveness. Maria and David Santos celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary by renewing vows based on divine guidance they've received about their partnership's spiritual purpose. God reveals that their relationship serves not just their personal happiness, but also their community's well-being and their children's spiritual development. Their marriage becomes a conscious collaboration in divine service, rather than just romantic attraction or practical partnership. Singles discover that divine guidance about relationships focuses more on personal spiritual development than finding the perfect partner. God consistently advises people to become the kind of person they hope to attract, to heal their own emotional wounds before seeking healing through relationship, and to develop authentic self-love before expecting others to love them unconditionally. The revelation about sexuality shocks conservative and liberal communities equally. God explains that physical intimacy is sacred when it expresses genuine love, mutual respect, and spiritual connection between consenting adults. Gender identity and sexual orientation are revealed as natural variations in divine creativity, not moral categories requiring judgment or correction. Same-sex couples worldwide receive divine validation that their relationships can be just as spiritually significant as heterosexual partnerships when built on authentic love and mutual growth. Religious communities that previously condemned LGBTQ+ relationships face the challenge of reconciling their doctrines with direct divine communication, supporting love regardless of gender combinations. Parenting transforms as mothers and fathers learn to consult God about raising their children. Divine guidance consistently emphasizes nurturing each child's unique gifts and spiritual purpose, rather than forcing them into predetermined molds based on parental expectations or cultural norms. Discipline becomes about teaching consequences and developing wisdom rather than punishment and control. Marriage counselors discover that couples who pray together and seek divine guidance about their conflicts resolve issues much more quickly and sustainably than those who rely only on communication techniques and psychological strategies. The divine perspective helps partners see each other's behavior through the lens of love and growth rather than criticism and blame. Chapter 19: The Soul's True Purpose. As humanity grows comfortable with divine communication, deeper existential questions emerge. Dr. Patricia Williams, a philosophy professor who has spent her career debating the meaning of life, receives answers that revolutionize human understanding of existence itself. God reveals that every soul chose to be born at this particular time in history to participate in humanity's spiritual awakening. The revelation about individual purpose transforms career counseling completely. Instead of matching personalities with job descriptions, counselors help people discover their unique cosmic assignments, specific contributions their souls plan to make during this lifetime. A janitor discovers his work serves as much spiritual purpose as a doctor's when he approaches cleaning with love and service. A teacher realizes her real assignment isn't just education, but helping children remember their divine nature. God explains that Earth functions as a spiritual university where souls attend different classes through various lifetime experiences. Some souls specialize in learning through relationships, others through creative expression, physical challenges, intellectual development, or service leadership. Current global crises represent final exams for humanity's graduation to cosmic citizenship. The most stunning revelation concerns time itself. God reveals that from the divine perspective, all moments exist simultaneously. Past, present, and future are human constructs that help consciousness focus on specific learning experiences. Each soul has existed for eternity and will continue growing forever, making every temporary challenge or triumph part of an infinite adventure in love and creativity. Artists worldwide report divine inspiration, revealing that human creativity is direct participation in ongoing cosmic creation. Every painting, song, story, or dance adds to the universe's beauty and complexity. Musicians discover they're channeling melodies that exist in divine consciousness, while writers realize their stories reflect archetypal patterns that help souls understand their spiritual journeys. Scientists learn that their research serves spiritual purposes beyond practical applications. Every discovery about natural laws reveals more about divine creative methods. Physicists studying subatomic particles find themselves exploring the building blocks of divine thought, while biologists examining ecosystems discover how consciousness organizes itself into increasingly complex forms. The revelation that every human experience contributes to cosmic evolution transforms how people view suffering, challenge, and limitation. Personal struggles become opportunities for soul growth that benefit the entire universe. Individual healing contributes to collective transformation. Every act of love, forgiveness, or courage advances not just human civilization, but cosmic spiritual development. Chapter 20. The Silence Returns. On the morning of March 15th, exactly 18 months after the first divine voice spoke to humanity, something changes. The constant, clear communication begins to fade. People worldwide report that God's voice sounds more distant, requiring greater effort to hear clearly. Panic spreads as humanity faces the possibility of returning to the sacred silence they thought was gone forever. But God's final message, received by sensitive communicators in every nation, carries a shocking revelation. This period of direct divine communication was always meant to be temporary. Humanity has been attending an intensive spiritual training program designed to teach them skills they'll need for the next phase of cosmic evolution. Children who became natural divine communicators serve as translators for adults struggling with the fading connection. 8-year-old Maya Patel explains to the UN Assembly that the silence doesn't mean God is leaving. It means humanity is ready to maintain their spiritual connection without constant external support. Like training wheels being removed from a bicycle, the intensive divine communication was preparation for independent spiritual partnership. The revelation divides humanity into two camps. Some people desperately try to cling to the fading divine voice, developing religious movements focused on returning to the period of clear communication. Others embrace the challenge of maintaining their spiritual connection through internal development and community support. Dr. Sarah Chen, the former atheist who became a bridge between science and spirituality, makes a startling discovery. Brain scans of people who maintain clear spiritual connection after the fading show permanent neurological changes. 18 months of direct divine communication has literally rewired human consciousness, creating new neural pathways that can access non-physical information. The most evolved spiritual communicators report that while God's voice sounds fainter, their own spiritual intuition has grown dramatically stronger. They've learned to distinguish divine guidance from ego-driven thoughts, to maintain love and compassion during conflict, and to see every experience as an opportunity for growth. The training period has created a generation of natural mystics and practical spiritual teachers. Religious institutions face their final transformation. Those that adapt to supporting individual divine connection, rather than claiming exclusive spiritual authority, thrive as community centers for mutual spiritual support. Those that try to return to pre-awakening power structures find themselves increasingly irrelevant as people maintain direct spiritual relationships with or without institutional support. As the documentary concludes, the narrator reveals the ultimate cliffhanger. Sensitive psychics worldwide report receiving the same final message from the divine presence. In exactly 7 years, humanity will face a choice that will determine their spiritual future. They can choose to advance to the next level of cosmic citizenship, or risk losing their spiritual awakening entirely. The message ends with coordinates to a location in the Sahara Desert, where something is building beneath the sand, something that will require all of humanity's newly developed spiritual abilities to understand and operate. The age of divine training is ending. The age of cosmic responsibility is about to begin.